The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Greetings, everybody. This is Brian Underhill with CoachSource, and welcome to our webinar. I am talking to you from Silicon Valley in my office in San Jose, California, where for us, it's actually rather cold. It's in the high 40s Fahrenheit, and that's freezing cold for us. So I'm sure some of you are laughing at me describing this as cold, but you know, that's what happens in California. We want to ask you to introduce yourself, please, in the question panel so I can say hi to people. There's all kinds of people I know and don't know here. So welcome, everybody. Welcome, Linda from France, Willie from Illinois, James Dillon from France. We have all kinds of people, a bunch of people from the Bay Area. Jerry Tucker, how are you? From Tucson. Jeff Cohen from New York. Scott from Los Angeles. Welcome, everybody. I'm seeing more and more names coming up here. People from the UK, Diane Vare, Navid, people more Californians. So welcome to our webinar today. I have 3 screens, so you're going to see me moving around a ton. That gives me a chance to see your questions and see feedback, as well as keep an eye on the various slides that I have to show you. We have an hour, so we don't have a lot of time. So I'm going to just get right to it, and feel free to continue introducing yourself, and I can come back to that panel in a moment. So for those of you who don't know me or know a whole lot about my story, I wanted to take us back many, many years in the field of coaching. And this is back when phones looked like this. So we're going to go back about 15 or so years, which is a long time for the executive coaching field. Now, I had just finished up graduate school, maybe 20 years ago, finished graduate school and started working for Marshall Goldsmith as a consultant. And I was one of many consultants whose job it was to deliver telephone feedback or face-to-face feedback to people after they've gotten their 360-degree assessment. And we would do this tens of thousands of times per year at Marshall's firm. However, one day I walked into his office and he was on a speakerphone with a vice president of marketing for a cell phone company, hence the cell phone. And she was saying to him, "Marshall, I really liked that meeting you did with me. You know, that meeting we did to talk about my feedback. I want to do more of that." And Marshall said, "Yeah, sure, we could do that. That's easy enough to do. We can make arrangements for that." And she said, "Okay, great, but I don't want just another session or two. I'd actually like to do 6 months of this, or even a year of this type of coaching." And Marshall said, "Sure, we could definitely do that." And then she said, "Okay, great, but I've got a team of, say, 12 people, and I want to have maybe you or your coaches do the same thing with my entire team of 12. You know, do you think you can do that?" And Marshall said, "Of course we can." Now, I'm getting kind of excited because I'm assuming I will be part of this team because I just happened to walk into the office here and overheard this conversation. And so I'm sort of hoping I'll be part of this coaching team. But then she asked a very interesting question. And she says, "Marshall, so if you're going to work with my team and I for a year, I need something to tell my boss about this big cost we're going to have. So what exactly will you do with our team for the next year?" Now, I have no idea what he's going to say. And I don't believe Marshall had any idea necessarily what he was going to say because we had never done this before. We'd only done these one short coaching sessions, the feedback sessions before. And so I couldn't wait to hear what Marshall was going to say because he's the master, right? And so I waited for a second. He thinks about it and he looks down at the screen, at the phone, and he looks back and he goes, "You know, Sue, my colleague, Brian Underhill, just walked in. Brian, why don't you tell Sue what we're going to do with her team for the next year?" Oh boy. I had no idea what to say. I don't even know quite what I said. Whatever it was, maybe it was good enough for us to do that project, which we did. But what I decided from that point on is yes, maybe I want to be an expert on all things executive coaching, and what's happening in coaching all over the world, all over the industry. And that began the research journey that we are today. So about 2005, a great company, Executive Development Associates, and I teamed up to author our very first research study industry-wide on the executive coaching field, 2005 study. And that actually led unexpectedly to the book, Executive Coaching for Results. We weren't really planning to write a book when we did that research, but we had a lot of companies that were interested and wanted to participate. And so we did a book, which came out in 2007. We then repeated the research in 2013. Some of you may have seen that. It's actually available for free on our site if you want to go peruse that 13 research. And then we knew we needed to repeat it in this last year. And a chance meeting with a professor, Joey Collins, at Seattle Pacific University meant that we could team up with him and some of his fabulous IO PhD students to help us carry out the research. And we are now just releasing this research. It was conducted in 2017, and we just released it here at the beginning of 2018. And I'll be sharing findings from that research today, as well as letting you know how you can get, what are some of your options to get the copy, either paid or even for free, if you're so interested. So this research started as our largest ever, actually. We had over 950 raters. And we did a 4-dimensional perspective. So we had 4 views. Sorry, I keep looking at the question panel just to make sure I'm catching everything. We had 4 views to weigh in on the industry. So the first is from organizations. So people who manage coaching at different companies, the practice manager of coaching. And we had nearly 100 of these organizations fill out our surveys. We then added a new group last time around and continued to survey internal coaches, of which we had over 117. So coaches that work inside a company. Some might be only coaching the whole time, although most of the time they do many other jobs and then also do coaching as part of their job. We also surveyed external coaches, 657. That's a huge number. At CoachSource, we do have over 1,100 external coaches. And so that was a fairly easy group to ask. And I see many of you are with us on this call here today. So perhaps you were part of the respondent group. So we appreciate that and thank you for doing that. And then the last group, which I think is the most interesting, but the hardest to get, these are real, live, living, breathing executives who actually worked with a coach at one point. And we somehow found 100 of them to fill out our surveys. That was the hardest group to find, but we did bribe them with an Amazon drawing. And so we were actually able to get some nice perspectives from what the executives have to say about their coaching experience. So that's where we'll be speaking from today. And for those of you outside the United States, you probably would like to know about our spread of respondents. And I will have to admit that it just so happened that the vast majority of our respondents seem to be based in North America, with probably, if I recall from top of mind, 20 to 30% outside the United States. So please keep that in mind when you are reviewing this data. And one other disclaimer is it's always necessary to point out that because we have these 4 dimensions, does not necessarily mean that the same person from this organization is matched up with a coach that worked at that organization, who's matched with an executive that works at that organization, who's matched with an internal coach that works at that same organization. That's not necessarily possible. So when we're comparing different groups, you'll have to keep in mind they may not necessarily be speaking from the exact same perspective. So with that, we are going to get started and take a look at a few stats. Now, first thing people might be interested on this phone call, depending if you're an external coach or an internal coach or a coaching manager, is what is expected to be the growth of this field of executive coaching? We asked organizations and we asked external coaches on a 7-point scale. Do you agree or strongly agree that there will be more external coaching in the future? And organizations, about 80% of them selected that choice or those two choices, believing that they would see more external coaching up ahead in the future. That's encouraging. External coaches, maybe many of you with us today, myself, perhaps, you could imagine whether we were more or less excited than organizations were. And we were just slightly more enthused that we would be seeing more growth in coaching. This would match my own experience at CoachSource, where we have experienced generally double-digit growth every year since the economic downturn. Our most recent year actually was not a double-digit growth. It was still a growth, but we still feel quite excited about continued spend and use of external executive coaches. So at the moment, we definitely support these figures. We asked companies whether they used coaches more or less over the past 2 years. And as you can see here, 60% of them actually did increase their use of coaching. 22% stayed the same and 18% decreased. But then we asked companies if they plan to use coaches more or less over the next 2 years. And those numbers are quite positive. Over half of them said they plan to increase their use of coaches, and 44% stay the same, but no one said that they would plan to decrease their use of coaches. And this next stat is quite interesting. It takes a moment to describe, but we asked participants about various forms of coaching: group coaching, team coaching, internal coaching, coaching for leadership development programs, and so forth. And in every case, at least 63% of the raters indicated that these trends were likely or highly likely over the next 3 to 5 years. So that right there shows that coaching in all its various forms is predicted perhaps to increase over the next few years. So we're going to be moving on to our first topic, official topic of the day, and that is to look at these coaching trends in a little more detail. Now, we have a couple of polls for you guys, so you get a chance to vote. Let me launch the poll here, and we're going to ask you to pick which trends do you think are likely or highly likely over the next 3 to 5 years, and you can select more than one if you'd like. Which trends are likely or highly likely over the next 3 to 5 years? We'll give you a moment to continue voting. Say hi to a few more people. Charlotte in Northern Cal. Julie Maloney just moved back to Atlanta. Xavier from Paris. Patricia from Seattle. I'm just reading randomly, by the way. If I don't read you, it's not because I'm favoring one person. Hey, Alex Green from Del Mar. I am from Del Mar. That's where I grew up. Lillian Castro, Buenos Aires. Lisa from Los Angeles. Oh, Jeff Cohen says it's 72 degrees in New York City. Wow. That's right. I heard they were having a heat wave. Damien Goldberg from LA. Virginia Williams from Switzerland. All right, let's go ahead and close the poll and share the results. Oh, very interesting. So the top choice among people here in this group is leadership development programs with additional coaching, followed by team coaching, followed by millennial leader coaching, internal coaching, 48%, and artificial intelligence, 13%. Let's take a look at the results from our research study. One second, I'm getting a message just to process real fast. And here they come. So we have a very sharp group here with us this morning, picking leadership development programs as the first choice. And that is exactly true from the organization practice managers who filled out our surveys. Picked this as the #1 choice. I'll quickly read the others and then I'll explain some of these. Team coaching was second, just like it was from this group. Internal coaching from the practice managers was third, and millennial leaders fourth. We'll talk a little more about each of those. And everyone had no problem guessing the very last choice, artificial intelligence replacing human coaches. Let's take a closer look at some of these. I'll show you the top 5 more in particular from organization practice managers. Leadership development programs with additional coaching does seem to match our experience here at CoachSource, where we're finding more coaching programs being added to leadership development programs. And we've probably always done this to some extent, but we are finding some more corporations that are specifically building coaching into leadership development programs. The coaching may not be as long in length or as robust as, say, a proper 6-month assignment, but it still can reinforce the learnings of the program over time. There is one study that I wouldn't remember the name at the top of my head, and there's been others that have shown that if you send people to training or a different group to training plus coaching, as you can expect, the group that went to training plus coaching generally would show higher retention of the material and use of the material back on the job. I think that's probably not a surprise for anyone here. The second top choice from the managers was the leader as coach training. This one surprised me a bit, as this is basically teaching leaders coaching skills. Surprised me it came in #2 only because this has been around for quite a while. And I know it's always been part of our field, of course. But I just didn't think it would score #2 out of all of these trends, honestly. That puts it pretty high up there. But apparently, this trend for the next 3 to 5 years could increase. So those of you who teach this type of training, or those of you considering bringing this type of training on, may certainly want to consider this as a possible growth area for our field. And I know there are lots of companies out there that do teach this. I've even seen some interesting measurement results at companies who teach their leaders coaching skills. They have then looked at engagement survey scores for leaders who received this training and those around them versus leaders who had not. And they are seeing significant differences between those who had the training and those who did not when you equalize for other factors. #3, the one that I showed you earlier, more external executive coaching. That was the 3rd highest from the organizations who are purchasing coaching. They would expect that to be an upcoming trend over the next few years, as we've already covered. #4, organizations streamlining coaching under fewer vendors. Some of you may have experienced this already, or you're an organization that's doing this or has done it. We are finding that because coaching has become more popular, it's become more of a demand on the person who has to manage the coaching at a given organization. And so some organizations have instead said, instead of managing 40, 50, 60 individual coaching contracts, let's get a firm or a few firms to kind of get in the middle of that and organize and streamline the coaching for the organization. So my suggestion to coaches usually is make sure you're aligned with a couple of different coaching providers, because as an individual practitioner, sometimes an organization may say, we're going to go with these bigger companies. And so you'll want to be aligned with the bigger companies so that you are still, of course, carrying out the work. And finally, team coaching is the 5th choice there. Team coaching has many definitions, I must say. I'm actually been studying this a lot in the last year. At CoachSource, we are launching a team coaching product service. But in the last year, when a company says to me, we want team coaching, I have found that they mean different things at different times. So once I heard we want team coaching, I investigated further what did they mean by this, and it turned out what they really needed was team, sort of traditional team building, team development, forming, storming, norming, performing, 5 dysfunctions of a team, you name the theory, but all focused on how a team can be more effective. But then I had a different request for team coaching when it turned out what they wanted was a little light amount of team building, but they actually wanted every leader in the team to work with a coach and to have some synchronized sessions relating to that as well, which is quite a different thing. So team coaching coming out as the 5th highest. And if you want to just take another look at the entire layout here, a few other things you'll see: internal coaching, we'll talk about that, and millennial leader coaching. Coaching fees decreasing, since I know we have a lot of external coaches on the line with us. You can see that was actually second to last as an upcoming trend, so maybe that's encouraging for some of you. And artificial intelligence was something that David Peterson of Google has been warning us about. And he isn't saying coaches will totally be replaced, but he does say that a large amount of the work that coaches do could actually be eventually replaced by artificial intelligence. And sometimes he gets pushback when he talks about that, but I would advise that we should always be watching out for trends in the future of our field that could impact our field one way or another. One last thing on trends, if you'd like to compare what internal coaches said with external coaches with the practice managers. These are the practice managers we've already discussed. Internal coaches basically had a similar list, but you can see one area that they favored, of course, was internal coaching, listing that as their 3rd highest compared to practice managers who put external coaches as a more of an increase. But let me also point out a different element here that showed up from internals and externals, but did not appear in the top 5, at least, not that it was too far away, from organization practice managers, and that's coaching for millennial leaders. And obviously millennials are now, I believe, the majority of the workforce already, and I don't know if they, when they will become the majority in the leadership positions, but they already are heading that direction. The oldest of the millennials should be 35 or a bit older now, so they're well into their careers. And we had an interesting experience at CoachSource with one of the big 4 accounting firms who said, we're going to be doing this program for our millennial leaders. Can you send us coaches for this leadership program we're going to do? And forever and ever at CoachSource, we seem to have always been rewarded, or our clients seem to have preferred coaches who are quite seasoned. I like to jokingly say, the more gray hair, the better, or no hair, it could be better. You know, generally, the further along one is in their career, the more senior they are, the more our clients seem to prefer those types of coaches. And so I will send to this firm some of the usual coaches that we might send. And they actually surprised me by writing back and rejecting every one of the coaches we had proposed, because they said they just didn't feel like these coaches were going to connect or work well with their millennial leaders. And they basically more or less said, do you have other choices that could work with millennial leaders? And our struggle at CoachSource is we're all built for much more seasoned senior coaches. And the youngest coach I could possibly find at the time was 35, and that was about only one coach did we have in their 30s. Of course, we suggested her, and then eventually we found other coaches that weren't necessarily younger, but they just were really great at working with millennial leaders. It doesn't necessarily mean one has to be young, but I think these coaches that are working on this program somehow are able to connect well with the millennial leaders, and maybe because they have millennial children, it may be because they're young at heart, it may be a number of reasons why they've connected well with these leaders. But millennials are shown through research to really want coaching and mentoring. They're also very open to doing coaching more virtually. I have an increase in coaching done by app, video conference, etc., and more on the spot coaching as well. So an interesting trend there regarding that. So I'm going to take a few bits of comments and so forth from folks here. Valerie Davis is pointing out that the study I'm talking about, and it's probably the one referring, well, she'll clarify, the one referring to when you add coaching versus a training program all by itself, was done by Richard Kilberg, who's a real legend in our field. So I'm assuming that's the one she's referring to. Vicki is asking about the yellow bars in my last graph here. Those yellow bars are the ones that you guys all voted on a little bit ago in our big poll. So I'm just showing you where those items placed in here. I'm being asked if screenshots could be taken and sent out to network members. I think on a limited basis, that's fine. And or we could talk about how to get Ray is asking how to get you some proper shots of the ones that you'd like with proper citation. And yes, Valerie Davis is confirming that Richard Kilberg is the one who did that study I'm referring to. So that's great to hear. Again, a real legend in our field and always has something interesting to say. Okay, so we're going to move on to our second topic. And now what we're going to do is take a look at why are companies hiring coaches? I mean, what's the purpose, the main purpose of coaching? And you get a chance to see, we had such a great group at our last choice of this poll who got everything so right. So we're going to see how you guys do again on this next poll. What's the primary purpose of coaching? And you should see some of the choices: transitions, career coaching, performance problems, leadership development, executive presence. Give you a chance to do that. Okay, people are voting, taking a look at some of the inputs here coming in as well. Samia is talking about having more millennial coaches or building more diversity within the CoachSource pool, and I fully agree with that. We're definitely giving that thought as we speak, of course. And Virginia Williams in Switzerland asking about a coaching app or know about an app regarding coaching. If anyone who has opinions on apps regarding coaching, feel free to write them in and I can relay them back as well. And take a look at our results. Okay, so here's our choices here. Leadership development is the #1 choice at 79%. This probably wasn't too hard to figure out. And you'll see momentarily that we, again, have a very smart group. But then there's a big drop-off here to next up, executive presence at 13%, transition coaching, 6%, career coaching, performance problems, 3%, and career coaching, 0%. Now, I only let you choose one, but our participants in the research study actually got to choose several choices, so their numbers might look a little bit different than yours. But let's take a look at what organizations said they believe the purpose of executive coaching was. And just like you all did, leadership development shows up as the first choice here. Transition coaching comes in second, about a little over half of the assignment. Someone in transition, they're onboarding, they are new to the company, moving into a new job. And executive presence, third place. Now, in our last study, executive presence and transition were flip-flopped. Executive presence came in second, transition came in third. And when you look at year-over-year comparison, executive presence, transition made a big jump, actually. Leadership development actually made a small decrease, but transition made a big jump. And that probably matches our experience at CoachSource, where we seem to be getting more requests for coaching for someone who's in a transition period within their company. Executive presence being third. I have written an article about this very thing, and you've probably seen other writings on this, that the best definition I've heard of executive presence is we'll know it when we see it. And I've seen it defined in all kinds of ways. It could include one's ability to influence. It could be one's how they carry themselves, or I've heard it described as gravitas. It could be their image and how they're dressed. It could be all kinds of things, actually. And so when we get a request for executive presence at CoachSource, we usually have to dig in further to find out what do you mean by that exactly? What is it that you are describing? And so that's always a bit of a tricky one, but it's certainly one that carries a lot of interest among many of our clients. Fourth place is fixing performance problems. And at 25%, so it's about a quarter of the assignments organizations will say are used to help leaders that might be in some trouble. That may or probably matches what we see at CoachSource. I still get now and then one of those really tricky ones where the person is in some trouble and really needs to fix something and there's not a lot of time left. But I don't see that quite as often as we once did. And in fact, this performance problem item has been decreasing over the third iteration now of our study. Career coaching, where do I go with my career? What's my next move? Or maybe even, do I switch careers? You can see that way down here, and then life coaching in last place. But what's interesting is when you now look at all of the groups answering the same question, and I know this slide is going to be hard to digest from where you're sitting. What I'd like to point out on it, though, is that leaders who are second place, the executives, right? They are this orange bar. They have kind of a different view on all of these areas for coaching. So on leadership development, you see a pretty big drop between what the organization said, who we just saw, and what the executive said. Transition coaching, you see another big drop. Executive presence, another drop, because of course these executives already have presence, right? This isn't an issue. Performance problems, another drop, because the executives don't have these performance problems. So those are those other executives. But then look at these last two: career coaching, a huge jump, and even life coaching for that matter. Now I have a couple theories on that. One might simply be executives don't necessarily know all of these terms about the different types of coaching that we all do who are in the field. And so for them, coaching, I'm working with a coach and they're helping me in my career. I'm becoming a better leader and so forth. And so it's, they don't necessarily, maybe don't call it the same thing that we in the field do. And so that might very likely be the answer. And that actually has happened in our past surveys as well. And, but also having said that, I think many of us who are external coaches find that a number of our assignments, while we are there to work on a leadership matter of some form, perhaps, we sometimes end up having discussions with the executive about their career and where are they at and so forth. It's not necessarily my primary job at all, but sometimes in a coaching assignment, the executive will bring some of that up. And I would like to allow them some space to discuss this. And in some rare cases, it could even be, the person's not really happy at this particular company or with that particular boss, and they're debating whether they want to make a move. As a coach, I don't feel like I would encourage someone to make such a move, but through our coaching, if we're talking about it, it could be a topic of conversation. And I've had companies tell me that if the person decides to leave as a result of coaching, they would be okay with that because the person probably was going to leave anyways. So career coaching and life coaching, you can see here, have higher ratings from executives than from all of the other groups. Now, the one topic that's incredibly interesting to many of you who are external coaches, actually all coaches, I should say, is what are executives most looking for when they are looking for a coach? Now, before I go there, let me just take a quick look at any commentary here. I'm saying transition coaching from Deborah Dubois. Hi, Deborah, how are you? Has been her experience for coaching. We're getting some coach apps, I think, written in as well. Of course, BetterUp is the big player in the app-based coaching approach. And they really are looking to sort of democratize coaching down to more levels of leaders. And they've got a really nice interface. But the coaching that they use, I think, is less intensive than maybe your full executive 6-month coaching, and definitely at a much lower price point. So I'm getting an app mention for that. And Barb is asking what company. That's BetterUp. BetterUp. Okay. Someone is recommending another coaching app. I haven't seen it myself, called Sparity.com. Bob Young. Sparity, S-P-E-A-R, like Spear, I-T-Y.com. Technology to differentiate your coaching. I haven't seen it myself, so I can't comment yet. I've seen many apps that are focused on habits, which I think are promising for coaching. So an app where you put in certain habits that you'd like to work on and improve every day, and then it bothers you and pesters you. I have one such app called Productive that I've been using lately to play around with. And I basically put in certain goals that I don't know if you could see this, but I put in certain goals that I'd like it to pester me about every day, like, you know, turn off my TV screen by 11:15, read the Bible, exercise, time out how much work I'm doing, so on and so forth. And then it pesters me every single day at various times of day, asking me whether I did these things. And then it keeps track of how much I did these various things. And so as a coach for some of my leaders who are working on a daily discipline, like being a better listener or whatnot, you can use a habit minder type app to help them keep focused on one of those daily disciplines. And in some apps, you can actually see their statistics. So it gives you something to talk about with them when you are coaching them. Okay. Someone else is saying, Linda is a great point. Clients are always bringing up their career progressions and their concerns about that in coaching. I fully agree. We probably all experience that. Our third and final poll is always a lot of fun, and is what do executives most want when they're hiring a coach, do you think? You have some choices. Maybe you have the industry experience of where they're in, or a certification, advanced degree, ability to build rapport, business experience, or just general experience and skills as a coach. What do you think executives most want when they are hiring a coach? And in a moment, we'll tell you what executives most want. All right. Give you just a couple more seconds. We have such a lively group. I'm really enjoying this. Got about 101 people in the room, and it's closed. Apparently there's no more room for people to come in to this webinar today. It means we may have to do more of these. Okay, let's go ahead and close the poll and share the results. Okay, what do executives most want? Number one, ability to build rapport. I think you'll find that to be a top choice momentarily. And then we have one's experience or skills as a coach. Next up, I think you'll see that coming up in a bit. Business experience rates next up there. Industry experience is pretty low, and certification very low. And again, we have a very sharp group here in the room, because we are now going to take a look at what executives had to say, and you'll see some of your choices appearing here right near the top. So let's reveal the whole thing in a moment. Let's start at the top, though, just to give you the first four, because these are kind of the top four that all scored over 80 percentage points from the executives, who, by the way, got to pick many choices. That you guys only got to pick one choice, but they got to pick a variety of choices that they felt were important to them. The number one choice, of course, 97% picking ability to build rapport, trust, and comfort with the coach or with the leader, depending on how it was asked. And that certainly makes sense. I think most coaches are good at this very naturally. In the very rare event that a coach is not good at this, I don't know how long they last as a coach necessarily, but that's such an inherent important part of being an effective coach, is to build that safe place, that place of trust with the leader. Next up, experience and skills as a coach, 93%. So this is basically how long have you been coaching? Are you good as a coach? Are you effective as a coach? And what's interesting when we screen coaches at CoachSource is it's a little hard for us to ascertain this when we aren't being coached by that coach, or I'm not sitting in on that coach's sessions with others. So we have to ascertain that through how many years someone has been coaching. Has someone been coaching as an independent practitioner for a number of years or more is important to us. What levels they tend to coach at. Where do they get training or any kind of degree, and things like that that we look at to determine whether we sense that someone is perhaps decent as a coach. Business experience is the third one. Hey, thank you guys. People are saying, hey, I'm not seeing the slides. Glad I looked. There we go. Thank you. I got all kinds of feedback saying I'm not seeing the slides. Thank you for pointing that out. So let's take a look again. Build rapport was your top choice at 97. Experience and skills as a coach at 93. And now we'll talk business experience at 86. Business experience is very important to executives. I believe it's matched by some of the other groups, which we'll see in a moment, but executives really like to see that business experience. And I wrote another blog piece that I jokingly said, a leader said to me, I want a coach who's done my exact job before, but on a much larger scale. And some of the jobs that these executives have, it's literally impossible to find a coach that's actually done what that executive does today for a living. But the more business experience a coach has, the better. If you've been an executive, particularly P&L or in a large company, those are things you want to always really promote on your bio, near the top of your bio, to show some of the business experiences that you've had as an executive back in your prior career, perhaps. Staff roles is certainly a business experience, of course. If you were in HR or OD, leadership development, that's probably a more common place where coaches come from. Or, if I came only through consulting, so I have to just type up that I've worked with a lot of executives as well. But I think understanding the language of business versus maybe being a pure psychologist that really hasn't been in the business world much is perhaps what they're asking for here. And then the fourth area is dealing with specific leadership challenges. That's a specialty, really. So as a coach, as a CoachSource, when a client says we have an executive who is needing help in transition, we actually know which of our coaches have specialty areas in transition. We can look that up, and then in some cases, the coach has told us more about why they're a specialist in the area of transition. And perhaps they've written articles, they do speeches, they've written books on it. So I have an entire, probably 2 shelves full of books of coaches in our network. Maybe some of you have a book here for coaches in our network who've written books on various topics. And when I can go to a client and say, this coach has written a very book on this very topic. That's how much of a specialist they are in this topic. it really, really helps. Now, you don't have to have a book in all cases, but I'm just saying to demonstrate that you really are a specialist in an area really helps the executive to become quite interested in the particular coach. Let's take a look at some of the other choices down the list here. Area of specialty as a coach, it's actually similar to the last question. Culture match, recommendation from a colleague, industry experience. Cost is fairly down here now. And executives actually paid for coaching about half the time out of their own budgets. Location is even less so. Certification and advanced degree are down here, as well as being certified in a specific tool. Now, this is interesting. This is the first year in our study that certification has now passed advanced degree as being slightly more important. In other parts of our research, we did find increased preference for certified coaches, more so than we have in past years. And so that's an interesting finding in and of itself. And what these executives are looking for is not too dissimilar from what some of the other rater groups had to say. So here's all 4 rater groups answering the same question. And the top 2 are the same across the board, the rapport or the experience and skill as a coach being your top 2, no matter who you ask. Business experience, important from all 4 groups. As you can see here, slightly more important for executive than the other groups. And the specific leadership specialty that I mentioned a little bit ago also makes a top 4 showing from everybody. Areas that are the lowest, the knowing a specific tool. By the way, we still search at CoachSource for coaches who are certified in Hogan or Leadership Circle 360 or some of the different tools. So these tools are always going to help you as a coach, but when you stack them top to bottom, it does end up last, as does advanced degree, which is too bad for those of us who spent all that time in graduate school as well. I'm asking if a slide could be enlarged, so I appreciate that feedback. I can work on that. I can't do it at this very moment, but I can certainly work on it for the next one of these webinars. We'll do this same webinar again in case you've missed any part of it or want to catch it again. You'll see that in the same place where you found the invitation for this webinar. Someone is saying, could some of what we're showing here be culturally sensitive? And I'm sure it is. And again, most of our raters were in the United States. So we can always keep that in mind, because I do know, for example, in certain other parts of the world, the certification, for example, is seen as more critical, in my experience, than in the US, although I do find that that's changing in the US. Okay, doesn't look like I have any other questions. So we're going to go to our last segment for today. We're going to talk about how coaching is being measured. I'm not going to poll you this time around. But we did ask companies, how are you measuring coaching? And maybe you can take a moment to think about that. What do you think is the most likely way coaching could be measured from some of the clients you serve or at your own company? Here's some choices that we asked about in our surveys. That being self-report, ask the leader what they thought of coaching. And next up is by the manager of the person being coached. A mini survey, seeing if a mini survey is a very short survey to measure improvement. Promotion, did they get promoted? Linking it to business impact, or doing a full 360 again, or even not measuring at all. So we asked that question of all 4 groups, and organizations came back with 80% of them saying that they do ask the leader whether they feel they improved as a result of coaching. And the next highest choice actually falls down to 53% who say, we asked the manager of the person who was coached whether they improved. You can see, though, that there's a pretty big fall from 80 down to 53, because that's only half of the companies who are choosing this choice. And then everything else kind of falls down beyond that. If you want a little bit of encouragement, though, is this 6% of companies who say they don't measure at all has actually decreased over the years. So more and more companies are doing some form of measurement after their coaching assignments are completed. I will say my concern with these top two, and perhaps you agree, is that these two are quite subjective assessments of whether a leader improved. So obviously, if you ask the leader who was just coached, who spent a lot of money and time through a coaching engagement, what did you think? You are more likely to get a fairly positive readback from them. And perhaps similarly, but not as often, from their manager. That's why we tend to prefer this mini survey, which is a very short survey that asks everyone around the leader, did you see improvement since coaching began? It's usually done at about 6 months after the assignment has started. And so we find this is a more objective measure. It's also very short and not burdensome for the raters, which is why I don't really prefer the follow-up comprehensive 360. That's a full 360 being run again after coaching. I think that bothers the raters and takes a lot of time. The executives who receive coaching seem to remember things differently. They do remember this self-report of progress, but then they don't really vote for much else. As you can see, our next highest choice is the business impact at 24%. Everything else is below that. So they're basically believing that at least a quarter of them are saying that there was some measurement of business impact, and that's why we are deciding that coaching was effective. External coaches also picked the same two that the organization did, and roughly in the same percentages for those top two. So we probably don't see a surprise here. A little bit more likely to use a mini survey, perhaps, than organizations. And internal coaches, also the one about self-report. But interestingly, their next choice is promotion, whether the leader got promoted as a result of coaching. So kind of some different views on how coaching is being measured, which is quite interesting. And you can probably see many of these numbers could stand to be increased, particularly whichever ones you find to be most effective, because many of them are well below 50%. In the area of ROI, business impact, we ask companies, are you linking coaching to business results or measuring an ROI? And you're seeing 2005 to 12 to 17. And what I'd like to point out is from 05 to 12, we actually saw a nice jump in the number of companies who are measuring ROI in some way, shape, or form. You actually have 51% that are doing it in some way, shape, or form in 2012, compared to 7% in 05. By the way, this scale was slightly different in 05, so we got to remember we're using two slightly different scales here. But this number of 51% actually falls when we get to this current iteration. It falls from 51% to 32% of companies that are doing some kind of linking from coaching to ROI. And instead, the number of companies who aren't doing it but would like to has increased again up to 63%. Now, those of you in the field probably would understand that measuring ROI in coaching is quite difficult, may not be possible, but often is seen as a bit of the holy grail of our field if someone could figure out only how to do this. And there are methods to do it. I often talk about my friend Lisa Edwards, who does a lot of work in measuring the ROI of coaching, and she's written a book on that very topic. And so for companies that really need to connect coaching to a business ROI, I often recommend them to speak with her. But having said that, it's not the easiest thing to measure because very often relies on self-report data of the executive who was coached, who would indicate whether or not they saw business impact because of coaching, what that business impact was, how much of the impact could they attribute to coaching, and then balancing that against the cost of coaching to come up with an ROI measurement. So companies still really want to do this, but it's not easy to do, and that's probably part of the challenge as to why they're not easily able to do this. I'm being asked as we start to get to our last question for you. Did you ask how coaches are found? Yes, we did. We definitely did do that. Someone else is saying our data on the certification seems to conflict the ICF. Yes, it does. The ICF was in, and I'm an ICF member and I know them quite well. They were in the room when I presented this not long ago back in Georgia last week. Their results usually show that most everyone prefers a certified coach. And as you saw here, it was second or third to last in our choices. But elsewhere in our study, we did find that increasingly people, executives and organizations are starting to prefer a certified coach as well. Looking for other questions. The book on ROI from Drew. I don't know if I even have it here that I could grab easily. I don't see it right off the top of my head, but Lisa Edwards, pretty simple name. Lisa Edwards is the author and the purveyor of coaching with ROI. And she's done a lot of ROI studies in coaching. So I'm sure you are able to look her up. So as we finish up with 3 minutes left, I'd love to hear from you about what implications do you see in here for you or your company's practice of coaching. If you just name an implication for you as a coach or for your company, if you're a practice manager or an internal coach, and go ahead and put it in the question panel and I can read a few out. What implications do you see from this research? Someone says, just feeling encouraged. Helen, that's a great one. That's a great one. I appreciate that because you did see research showing more and more coaching taking place and more investment in coaching. Vicky's talking about millennials and how your services would support them. That's an awesome thought right there. I really appreciate hearing that one. Other implications, feel free to type them in. Oh, here they come. Use of technology like habit minding app could be working for millennials from Drew. That's a great one. Increasing ROI to prove the value of coaching from Umberto. More team coaching than expected from Jeff Cohen. Having a specialty is helpful as a coach, Adrian. Forget doing a follow-up 360 from Willie. Millennial coaching should be investigated as a potential new business from Maximilian. These are great inputs. Some of them I can't read quite easily enough. Oh my gosh, here's more. More on apps. Someone says proof. Oh, Lisa's book is on my shelf. Measuring the Success of Coaching. A step-by-step guide for measuring the impact in coaching. Measuring the impact in calculating ROI. So there you go for the title of that book. And being important to be part of a larger coaching organization. Excellent. Habit Minder as well. A few other things here. Let me tell you how you get your study. Also remind you that we are doing the same webinar again, I think in a 1 or 2 weeks time. So if you missed part of it, if you had any trouble with the audio or something like that, feel free to join us. If you are a CoachSource coach, you can get this webinar for free on the CoachSource Connect website, which you log in through your CoachSource login. And so this webinar would be available there for you. So for the research, if you go to this site, you can obtain the full version of the research. There's also a summary version. They are at cost. They do have costs associated with them. Companies that do business with CoachSource are being given the research free via their account service manager or engagement manager at CoachSource. So please talk to that person. If you're not sure who that is, you can contact us. If you are excited about especially the full version, we're actually going to release it over time for free on our blog. And the first episode will be out next month. So you can grab the whole thing for free if you just wait it out. Every other month, we'll release a chapter. And then by next year, everything will be free. So that's kind of the plan of attack for the research. And then the 2013 research is already on our site for free as well. So that's kind of where you can find some of this, but I did give you lots of the goodies out of this webinar, so hopefully you've enjoyed some of this as well. I think that will start to conclude. People are writing in, thank you, thank you. I really appreciate you. Thank you all for joining us today. And if you had any further questions or thoughts or comments, you're always welcome to send them along to us. And with that, we better let you go. So thank you, everybody. God bless, and have a great rest of your week.